How's it going, folks? Stu here. We are back at the desk. The London Film Festival has finished, but there are still many reviews to come because I saw many films. My brain is like, hey, cinema, eh? That old thing. Too much of it. But this year's festival closed out with a kind of surprise little gem in so much as it was a film from a beloved British actor turned director that there wasn't really a huge amount about online. I certainly didn't know anything about the premise of the film other than that it had just been announced as a closing gala for the festival. That actor turned director I mentioned is none other than Daniel Kaluuya, who just fucking rips. Love the dude. Everything he touches seems to be golden. So I sat down, not quite knowing exactly what to expect, but having high hopes nonetheless for The Kitchen, which is not Daniel Kaluuya and Kibwe Tavares' ode to my favourite part of any house. It is in fact a dystopian London set drama that was a really great time and a fantastic way to close out this year's festival. I had an absolute blast with this one. So The Kitchen, as I just mentioned, this is a directorial debut of both Daniel Kaluuya and Kibwe Tavares. The former of that you'll know as being just like one of England's greatest acting exports recently. The dude is awesome and I love every time he pops up in a film. But he's decided to flex his muscles behind the camera here alongside Kibwe Tavares, who actually haven't seen any of his stuff before. I believe he's a director that's worked in the short departments for a few different projects now, finally coming to the feature-length department. And the two of them have created a very kind of bold and ambitious dystopian look at gentrification, at class battles and class divides in society. It's one of those sci-fi films which grounds itself very firmly in a reality that we do know and that can feel believable watching on screen, that is able to pull out some really effective emotional beats in here and successfully say some things about the state of society and I suppose the state of class divides in society. Kaluuya co-writes here alongside Joe Murtagh, and the film they've created is essentially a very heightened but grounded look at a future where social housing is getting eradicated left, right and centre by the government and the police forces, and it's all been squished down into this centre kind of bigger social housing project called The Kitchen, where we find our lead characters existing in this community that refuses to sort of give in to the powers that are trying to rip them down. And right off the bat, that dystopian future, that dystopian world that Kaluuya has created here alongside his co-director Tavares is crucially grounded in a reality that feels incredibly believable. I think the best sci-fi is sci-fi that uses its premise to pull apart and heighten things that are already existing in the world that we know it. And The Kitchen here is a really great kind of evolution of a class divide that exists across the world, not just in London, but in any Western culture. And I think the world building there around the central story does feel very effective, if not a little bit messy in places. I think often directors, especially first-time directors, can feel a little bit like they need to show a lot more than they actually do need to, just to kind of convince us on concepts, especially when it's a high-concept thing like sci-fi. And actually I was impressed by how Daniel Kaluuya and Kibwe Tavares here show a lot more restraint in the setup of this thing when it comes to its big sci-fi dystopian concepts. That's not to say that this stuff doesn't eventually come. I mean, the title card of this thing comes over a wide establishing shot of a London that looks familiar but is obviously filled with lots of high-tech futuristic stuff. But I think crucially they throw us into this world on a grounded level with character stuff rather than immediately throwing us into the big kind of like hover-car-y sci-fi stuff that you see from a lot of futuristic films. And I think that's why this film's able to get over some of the bumpier territory that it goes to in its narrative, in the way it delivers its narrative across its hour-and-a-half runtime, because it's a film that never forgets, I suppose, the heart of the story it's trying to tell. And that is its sense of two things: its community and its environment and its location. Its community in the form of this kitchen, where obviously the social housing element adds this layer of kind of little guy against big guy, right? The community there literally coming together to protect themselves. And also its location, in that it's a very London film. And I don't just mean that in that it's literally set in London. I mean, obviously you can throw in any establishing shots of a London skyline and your film's set in London, voila, you've done it. But it feels like an incredibly British London film, made by Londoners, right? Made by people that know and understand what makes this city tick. That's something that is almost impossible to actually pinpoint, right? It just is a thing that some films get and some films does. And that adds this consistent level of authenticity to it all, which means that the sci-fi stuff that does end up weaving into the film never pulls away too much from the beating heart of this thing. And the beating heart of this thing is a really effective father-son dynamic performed wonderfully by Kane and Jediah Bannerman. The latter of that being a performer I don't think has done anything before this. I think this is his first film, and I don't need to be the first to explain that getting a newcomer in the form of a child actor to lead your film is quite a tall ask, right? We've seen far too many films where poor child performances let it down when it thinks it's doing a lot more than it actually is in that department. But I was incredibly impressed by Jediah Bannerman here. I thought he held his own in the film really, really fantastically, and he delivers in the moments where he needs to deliver. Because his character gets sort of drawn to two opposing sides of the film. You know, we've got the people that are wanting to stand up and do something about the situation they're in, and the people that are wanting to just sort of get on with things and not cause too much trouble. That dynamic was certainly being nothing new in cinema. We've seen plenty of films exploring that kind of push and pull, especially in relation to a father-daughter or a father-son or a mother-daughter, mother-son situation. But Jediah Bannerman does a great job selling that overall. He's really, really great here. I loved watching him throughout. But Kano alongside him is fantastic. I've not actually seen Top Boy, which is, I think, probably his best-known acting work. He is a British rapper as well, most notably known for that. He's really, really great here, and again, has this fantastic dynamic with Jediah Bannerman in the film. You really do believe and buy into this relationship very early on. And despite some of the film's somewhat messier moments or bits that didn't quite land as well, they are consistent. They are always there to sort of bring things back down to a grounded level and remind you of what it is you're watching and why you're watching it. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the film was shot on, but it feels like it's got this very kind of rough edge to it, while still showing off some very impressive visuals to boot. And there's some real energy to the bigger set piece moments of the film, which often come in the form of raids of the kitchen. I like the way that the directors here break up things and show the very real effect of raids on this community, the way that things can just sort of twist in a heartbeat and people can be taken away. I think the narrative structure of this thing sort of intermittently drops these raids to break up things, and it can sometimes feel a little bit like it's at odds with itself or going in too many different directions because of that. And there are certainly a few different narrative threads and sort of side character pieces that pop up here and there in the film, which don't necessarily feel like they flow as expertly as the film wants us to think they're flowing. There's a gang side of things that Benji's character is being pulled towards, but there's also Izzy's sort of place of work in the film, which is this very futuristic kind of funeral service that turns people's loved ones into trees. They're all really good, and I like the texture that adds to the world of the film and the world building and all the stuff going on around our central characters. But sometimes I'm not sure that it juggles it all as well as it needs to, in that it can feel a little bit like it will drop certain things to go and focus on others and then just pick things back up when it needs to. But I don't actually think that's as much of a problem as it might sound like when talking about it, because I actually sort of think, and this is going to sound like a huge cop-out, but I'm going with it anyway, I kind of think that messiness around the film actually does add to the film's sincerity, right? The kind of earnestness with which this is all done. Because it adds to a world which feels very sort of naturally alive, right? And I like the way that the characters are sort of being pushed and pulled in different directions. There may be a few kind of narrative turning points in the film which feel a little bit sharp, but they're able to get away with it because they do the groundwork of setting up believable characters in the first place. And I think it affords the film certain luxuries when other films might have fallen down. But what about you guys? Have you seen The Kitchen? Did you catch it at its world premiere at the London Film Festival? Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it. We'll have a little chat. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see me talk about more shit, go ahead and click subscribe. The button is down there for that, as well as links to my socials, my letterbox, my Twitter, my Instagram, you name it. Go have a click and then decide that you find me too annoying and then come back on yourself. I will of course see you guys very, very soon for some more thoughts on more films. But until next time, Daniel Kaluuya, man. This man, is there anything this man cannot do? Probably not.